There are hopes and treasures beyond your broken wing. There are hopes and treasures beyond your broken wing. Ooh.
Hi, I'm Deb Maybury, and you're watching Reveal, Connect, and Heal. Today I'm with John Paul and MaryAnnes Bedard. Do you mind, JP?
JP is
JP
fine.
it is. Thank you for having me into your home today.
Thank you for having us.
Yes. The theme of this segment has to do with when one couple has been sexually abused and the dynamics that happens throughout the relationship. There are a lot of relationships that struggle because this enters into them. But before we get into that, I have to acknowledge the event that you were at a few weeks ago. And you did something really special down in Boston. You both went as a team. So maybe you could just share a little bit with the viewers what you did and why you did it.
Oh, okay, sure. Well, last year I was running the Boston Marathon in 2013, and about 2 weeks before the marathon, I had disclosed that I was a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. And it was quite an emotional time being down there in Boston. And when I eventually finished the marathon last year, we were back out on the streets when the bombs went off. And it was, a devastating experience for the both of us. And compounded with the getting over the childhood sexual abuse disclosure. It was a lot to process when we came back to Toronto. So when we came back, I entered the treatment program at the Gatehouse in Toronto, and over the course of the 15 weeks with the other men in the program, learned to come to terms with what happened to me as a child. And MaryAnnes and I, at that point, had no desire to go back to Boston. No, it was just a real traumatizing place for the two of us. And in the course of the program at the Gatehouse, when we do this, one of the nights is writing a letter to the inner child. And I found it an incredibly transformative experience. And the process is you write this letter to your inner child, and you reconnect with that time of your life when the abuse occurred, and you bring that child back to a happier, healthier, safer place today. And I remember coming home that night and saying to MaryAnnes how amazing it was to see the other men in my program with me. We were just reduced to tears as we were going through that. It was just so raw, so emotional, and so healing all at the same time. And I started thinking that maybe I could go back to Boston and have MaryAnnes with me to bring that to a better place as well. And over the course of the next couple of months, I figured out what I wanted to do. So I decided to go back to Boston and run the marathon twice.
As one would.
Yeah.
Of course.
Yeah. So I started early in the morning, around 5 o'clock, or 4 o'clock. 4 o'clock, and ran the finish line all the way to the start line. That's 42 kilometers. And then I turned around with everybody at the start and ran back the other direction. And the main purpose was, one, to raise awareness for survivors of childhood sexual abuse, and also to raise some funds for the Gatehouse. And through social media, basically social media alone, I put out requests for donations and talked to people about what I was doing. And I think right now it's over $17,000. So it was an amazing experience, and it really taught me a lot about how strong I am inside and how strong we are as a couple, and how amazing the Gatehouse is. And over the last couple of months, I've heard a lot from the employees at the Gatehouse of how many men have called the Gatehouse to come in and register for a program. So every little person I hear about that is just, it makes it all worthwhile.
Well, thanks for sharing that. There are so many people that are in secrecy, as we know, that never reveal. And how long have you guys been married now?
27 years.
27 years. You've been through a lot of experiences
Yeah.
together, and there are so many couples that don't make it for a variety of reasons. It's not just all about sexual abuse, but there are so many things that can enter a relationship along with the history of the sexual
Mhm.
abuse.
Mm.
So when did you reveal what had happened to you?
Well, when we first met, I might have mentioned that there was a history of sexual abuse in my past, but I think I just glossed over it.
Mhm.
It had always been something in the background that I don't think we ever really talked about.
No.
Um,
Or you didn't allow it to be a feature in your life, or to have it be something that you needed to talk about or deal with, or that had even impacted you, I think.
Right, so you knew about it basically from the beginning.
I knew a bit about it. He disclosed a little bit about it at the beginning, but not, not in detail, and not to the amount that it had impacted his life.
And maybe share a little bit about the feelings for both of you then with that conversation. When you tell her, what are you feeling to build up to tell her? And then what are you feeling when you receive that news?
the big disclosure a year ago? That
No,
one?
the first one, the original one first.
Well, the first one, I think like a lot of men who have been sexually abused as a child, my initial reaction when I was young was being terrified, being afraid, and not trusting any adults with that knowledge. So that kept that secret buried. And then I carried that secret into my adolescence and teen years, and I was terrified that other boys and young men would find out, and there was a lot of issues with, my sexuality in terms of them knowing about it, so it buried it a little deeper. And then when I started dating, and when I met MaryAnnes, I think I was 19 or 20 when I met
Mhm.
MaryAnnes, it was a bit weird, I didn't really want that to come out, because it was just one more piece of baggage in the relationship that I just thought that, it's probably better not to scare her away with this, so I didn't tell her. And then I think the most pivotal thing happened was about 2 years after we got together, we decided to start a family, and MaryAnnes got pregnant, and that buried the secret deep, deep inside me, because I was worried that if people knew I had been sexually abused as a child, there would be some sort of possibility that I would be a perpetrator. And I've learned today that that is totally not true, but it was just one more thing that just kept it deep inside me.
And I always acknowledge that as well, because I've had it on these interviews before,
Mhm.
and I felt the same thing myself.
Yeah.
Like, what if somebody thinks that, that chatter that goes on in our brain?
Yeah.
So what was your reaction to when he did tell you the first time?
When we were younger, it was just sort of in a sort of a bypass conversation that somebody had touched him inappropriately, and then we sort of moved on, and it wasn't. I think it was in the context because I work in childcare and do a lot of training around the signs of early childhood abuse in children, and our legal responsibilities as childcare workers about what we have to do. So I was often involved in training or in reporting incidents. So I think it was sort of came up as I've had an experience like that. But then we just sort of moved on. It was never something that he talked about as having a dramatic impact on his life, or what he felt, or that it was a big secret that he was holding back.
Right, and the thought that he just said about the fear of somebody thinking he would do that, did that
Mhm.
enter your mind, that he could possibly do that to your child?
No, and I was lucky. He was a stay-at-home dad. He stayed home with Noah for the first almost 3 years, and was an amazing father. It was never a thought that I worried about.
I know, it's crazy how it is.
Yeah.
It is a fear, and we bear that. I mean, like you said, I could feel your energy even going into that
It was a hard time.
spot. Right. So let's move ahead in the relationship, and this was sitting with you.
Yeah.
The abuse. So how did it manifest itself?
Well, I was my first sort of encounter with childhood sexual abuse, I was about 8 and a half, and it was a hockey coach, and it was, it could have been much worse than it was, but it was traumatic at the time. That was a defining part of my life. And then about 2 years later, I had a much more significant, there's no better vocabulary for it, encounter with two older men, well, young adults in a ravine, and I was, brutally assaulted. And from that point, I think my life felt like it had ended, and I started to drink and use drugs from about the age of 13 right on till I entered a treatment program in, I think I was 32 at the time, and had a couple of ODs where I was in the hospital, and there were just lots of wreckage over those years, and that was sort of the beginning of our relationship together. And MaryAnnes is a saint. I mean, there's no other way of putting it. She has a deep love for me and a belief in me that I never saw there in myself. And I think until I started sobered up and tried to rebuild my life, I was, I don't think I would have made it much longer if I hadn't entered a treatment program.
So as JP is going through this, what are you thinking? Did you ever attach all of these struggles with the sexual abuse?
I didn't. I always, he's an incredibly strong individual, but with an incredibly big inferiority complex. And I think one of the most significant things when he did talk to me about it was what put him in the ravine that day. So his mother had left when he was a child, and he was being raised by his father. At that point, it was not really acceptable, and he was spending a lot of time at home alone. And his father worried that if people found out, that they would take him away. So it was a secret. He wasn't supposed to answer the door or let anybody know that he was on his own. And that day he had stolen cigarettes from his dad, and he had gone to the ravine to smoke them. So he couldn't tell anybody, and he felt guilty and responsible and ashamed for having done all of those things. So he really felt like it was his fault. And that, I think, guilt and shame has defined him until he was able to come to terms with it as an adult. And that has been a significant part of his alcohol problem. It's been a significant part of battling depression, is always feeling inadequate and shameful.
And that's not uncommon with
No.
a lot of people.
No.
And particularly when you as a younger person feel that you somehow done something and you're responsible for being in that situation. It's incredible how that weight can hold you down for a long time. And like I say to a lot of people, is that you grabbed at whatever coping mechanism that you could at the time that got you through. And as much as we think negative things about the drugs and the alcohol in that situation, it actually served you and allowed you to continue on in your life until you got your footing in another way.
And it's made, since I've made the disclosure publicly and dealing with it, it's made dealing with the addiction issues and sobriety a lot easier, because I see how tenacious the childhood sexual abuse is, and how it has its tentacles in every part of my life.
Okay, so you decided it was time to stop drinking. The drinking, was that an issue in the relationship? Was it affecting things?
It was a significant issue in the relationship, but it was compounded with depression. And so John Paul was seeing a therapist at the time for bipolar depression, and he was on a lot of drugs for that. And she kept talking to him about the danger of drinking in combination with these drugs, and she was questioning whether or not she thought whether he thought he might have a drinking problem, which, you know, every alcoholic, I can stop any time. I'll stop for the next 2 days. See, I told you I could stop, and then starting again. But I think it was through that process. I think you really needed to hit bottom, and you did.
Yeah.
John Paul called me one day at work and asked if he could come and see me, which was unusual. And we went and sat in the park, and he said he had just spent the last 3 hours in a subway station trying to throw himself in front of each train that came through the subway. And I had no comprehension what to do with that. I think I actually got up and walked away and said, I can't talk to you until you see a doctor, because it was more than I could manage. I didn't know how to keep him safe, and I think up until that point I felt I could keep him safe, and that had exceeded my boundaries. And you did. You went to see somebody, we went together, and you know, we got some help.
And at what time then, through all that, because I know then you know, life goes on, and you started running at some point as another coping mechanism, but at what point did you attach all those coping strategies with the sexual abuse? When did that sort of really hit the wall?
That probably didn't come to my mind until week number 3 of the Gatehouse program last year. I'm a slow learner, stubborn as all hell, but I'm a slow learner. Yeah, it did not enter my mind until then.
Okay, so then what got you to the Gatehouse?
What got me to the Gatehouse?
Who's your sister?
Yeah, I had an issue with a family member in terms of I have one of my closest people in my life is an older sister, and she had mentioned to me that she was talking to my mother, and I have a really, really terrible relationship with my mother, and not really a relationship at all. And she had mentioned to me that over a course of a conversation to my mother that it had come up that I had been sexually abused as a child, and my sister didn't know the extent of it. And my mother had said, "Oh, John Paul's just being silly." And when I heard this secondhand conversation, I think it was the last straw. It was, I couldn't take it anymore. It was like, I have to deal with this. I just have to deal with this. And so I came home after that, talked to MaryAnnes, and said, I'm a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, and I'm going to get some help. I need to deal with it right away. And then I talked to my son, told him about it, and then I think about half an hour later, my Facebook status changed to, I'm John Paul Bedard, and I'm a survivor of childhood sexual abuse. And that was it, and it only became more public after that. And the way that I deal with and I've always dealt with my recovery from drugs and alcohol and my, issues with depression that I've had, I'm open about it. And I knew that I needed to be open about it for a couple of reasons. It's a way to keep me accountable. So if I say, so it's like saying I'm going on a diet. You tell everybody you're going on a diet, it becomes harder to break the diet. Same thing, by making this public, it keeps me on the path of dealing with it. And also, about a year before I made that disclosure, I was watching Theo Fleury on Battle of the Blades, and every night we were watching that, I would break down in tears, and MaryAnnes,
I thought it was the skating.
Yeah, she's going, what's going on? I said, I don't know what's going on, it's just I find it really moving. And I made a vow to myself that when I go public with this, I'm going to be a beacon for other men to come forward, because there aren't enough of us. And that's sort of the next chapter of my life, because that's where this is going.
Well, certainly both of you are doing a lot in terms of the awareness. It's crazy because it's such an epidemic
that nobody talks about.
Exactly, and the numbers are staggering.
Yeah.
And that's my whole point with what I do with Reveal, Connect, and Heal, and the books and everything is is that we have to break through the stigma and the trauma, and we have to feel comfortable talking about sexual abuse, because it's in every family. You know, the conclusion of my book. You know, you think you got your life under control and everything, and then you find out that there's another situation in your backyard with a family member that, you know, I didn't even know about. And yet I'm so out there talking about it. And there are people that are so quiet about it.
Yeah.
So within the relationship, and you said you spoke to your son. How was that? Because I know when you disclose, a lot of men, first of all, don't, or women, they don't tell their spouses or significant others. That's a huge step to share that. And then also, then you have to share that with your children, because a lot of times when you've been violated, that can affect that relationship with your child as well.
I felt that I needed to tell my son because we've always had such an open relationship with Noah, and I knew that I was going to be very public about this, and there would be no hiding it either way. And when I told him, I don't know if anybody knows how to process that information, but from what I've learned so far is people take their cue from me. So if I'm comfortable talking about the fact that I'm a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, immediately it puts other people at ease. They may not like to talk about it, but it certainly makes the conversation possible. And sorry, go ahead.
I think the other thing is he's an adult. He's 24 now, so you were able to talk to him sort of man to man, not as you would to a young child. And he hasn't started his own family yet, and I think it's an important thing to share.
Yeah, and I don't know, MaryAnnes at the very beginning wanted me to have
a big conversation
with Noah, and I don't even know what that would look like.
No.
Or if that ever needs to happen or would happen. As a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, all that I want is other people just to say, okay, that's all right, that's just part of you, it's not all of you, but it's part of you, let's move on. And that's, he's been able to do that with me. He's been loving, supportive, caring, but I don't think anything else has to happen.
I think people don't know what a disclosure looks like, and you may be ready to say I'm a survivor, but you're not ready to go into details, and they're not sure if when they disclose that's going to be what's required. But I think typically it's enough just to say this is what happened.
Yeah, I agree. That's actually going to be part of the next book, that little piece in there, because disclosure is huge.
Yeah.
That's a big piece of the whole puzzle, and how to do that, and how people are going to react.
And it's a discussion, right? It's a discussion. Yes. It's not an event.
It's not a one-time.
It's a discussion,
Right.
right? And that's what this has been, a discussion.
That's a great way to say it. It's not an event.
Yes. Yeah.
It's like it's not an event. It's the journey. Then it's incorporating that.
And I think it looks different for every survivor and every disclosure. And some people go further, some people don't. And I think it's whatever you can deal with.
Right. Excellent. So she's been quite a support. So talk about that in terms of the dynamic. I mean, I'm sure it goes both ways.
Absolutely.
You seem to have a very healthy relationship for the person on the outside.
No, it's
I'm sure it has struggles, but
no,
what's it been like?
That is a healthy relationship. One that struggles, absolutely.
I think now that I'm a facilitator at the Gatehouse, working in with the men's group, I'm aware of something that no one talked to me about when I went through the phase 1, and that's when you come home after a 2.5-hour intensive meeting with other survivors and your facilitators. You're tired, you're emotionally exhausted, and the second you walk in your door, if there's a partner waiting for you or a family member waiting for you at the door, they kind of want you to debrief what just happened, because they're trying to be supportive, and no one really knows how to be supportive. And MaryAnnes would, she would eagerly wait for me to come home, and I'd walk in the door around 9:45 at night.
How was it?
And she says, how was it? And I said, it was okay, but I wasn't ready to have a longer conversation than that. And I think as a partner, MaryAnnes felt very rebuffed by that, and thinking that I was sort of going inside of me again instead of this process, which was supposed to be about disclosure and coming out, and it didn't look like it was coming out. And it was a hard place for me to be at, but at least I felt like I had some control of the process because I was in it. MaryAnnes had no control over that process, and I would venture to say that as a partner of someone who is going through this process, it's a very, very ugly place to be. It's a lonely place
It's a
to be.
lonely place to be.
In what way is it? Tell me more about how it's lonely, because you come home, like I know, I mean that's such an emotional experience, and then you're waiting for him to say everything that happened.
Well, I think it was, I mean the Gatehouse, I didn't know what the Gatehouse was. I didn't know what happened at the Gatehouse. I didn't know these people that he was talking about. We've been married 27 years. We know everything about each other. And now, or I thought I knew everything about him, and now there was this other part that I couldn't be part of. And so it almost, it felt isolating. It felt like he was moving off in this direction, and it felt like he was getting his healing somewhere else. And when you've been the person that has been responsible for helping somebody over many, many years, for them to shift gears and seek that help somewhere else. I said to Jean Paul, it feels like I just got fired. That's what it felt like for me. I got fired from a job I've been doing for 27 years that I thought I was doing a really good job at, and now you don't need me anymore. And I think that was my biggest fear, was that at the end of this, he won't need me anymore.
Well, there are a lot of couples that, you know, the relationships end
I think-
during the healing process. But stay on that, because, okay, what can be done a little bit better? Because there are a lot of people that go to various types of therapy for help.
Yeah.
And as you know, you're the caregiver, the supporter, the raw, everything that you've done for him. Share a little bit about how you had to stand back and then what happened through that process.
We had to start having, we call them uncomfortable conversations, but I think that we've come to the place where we're talking about courageous conversations, where we had to sit down and really talk things, difficult things through in a way that was uncomfortable. Because through this process, people talk a lot about the victim of childhood sexual abuse or the survivor lose their voice. And part of recovery through the Gatehouse program is finding that voice. And through finding your voice, when you have a partnership, what you're actually doing is you're finding a new role for yourself. And if you have a partnership with somebody and then your partner has a new role, then you can either continue in your role and your relationship breaks down, or your role needs to change. And so we either grow apart or we grow together.
So how did each keep going? How did your role shift, and how did your role shift in terms of that?
Well, I think, to be perfectly honest, the first 4 weeks at the Gatehouse, by the end of that month, I would have given our marriage, on a good day, a 30% chance of survival. And I'm not saying it flippantly. I mean, it really, and it wasn't anything tangible that I could say that we were arguing or that we were fighting or, you know, anything. It just felt that I was, you know, one day I was this person, the next day I am a completely different person. I love MaryAnnes the same, but now what that love is different. What I need is different. What I contribute to the relationship is different. Everything is different. And I'm all about authentic conversations. I'm all about, I just want to surround myself with people who make me feel good about myself, people who I can be open about with myself, And as a couple, you are entrenched in relationships. You are entrenched in a certain type of dialogue that we've always had. But I have a choice, right? I have a choice at this point of the disclosure process where I can go back to that person who was alone, afraid, dependent, numbing myself with drugs and alcohol. And at 47 years, I didn't want to be that anymore. Or I could be this person, and I don't know what this person looks like yet, but I'm moving towards that person. And I really wanted MaryAnne to come with me, and not to be a new person herself, but we had to have a different trajectory in our relationship, and we've been doing that. We've been definitely doing that. But after that first 4 weeks, the thing that saved us was Arthur Lockhart at the Gatehouse decided to have a partners program, an information night, and MaryAnne went on her own for the first 2 nights, and basically was given an overview about what we do in that program, things that I couldn't articulate to her. And one thing that made MaryAnne feel so incredibly comforted, I think, was when she walked into that first night, and she was in a room with other partners of survivors, she kind of looked around and went, oh, I'm not the only one who feels like I've been fired, who feels powerless, who feels frustrated, who feels a little bit envious and angry.
And afraid.
There was a room for them, and that is the same feeling that I had when I walked in. I remember walking up those, whatever it is, 4 or 5 steps into the Gatehouse on that first night. I remember being stuck in the parking lot. If you arrive at the Gatehouse on the first night and you look around at the parking lot, there will be a bunch of men or women, depending on the night, staying in their cars. Sitting in the cars until 2 minutes to 7, and then everybody starts filing into the house together. And I remember sitting around in that room and everybody being just terrified. And I'm thinking, oh, this is horrible. And then in our first night, one of the men disclosed something in the first 15 minutes. He said, I just have to get this out there. This happened to me, and there was a particular behavior that he was doing. And it was, I can't believe somebody just said this in front of all these people. And there was a collective in the room of the other men saying, okay, maybe this might work. And we hit it immediately, and we all started to disclose in that room. And I remember coming home and feeling, whoa, this is amazing. I'm not alone. I'm not an alien. There are other guys feeling like this. And I had that, and I tried to explain that to MaryAnne, and I couldn't. But after her information night, you felt like that, but from the partner side.
Well, I think two things happened to me that night. Was I realized I wasn't alone, that there are other people that are struggling with the same thing, that are scared and are at a loss. I'm not very good when I don't have control. But here was a whole room full of people that were in the same place. But I think also Arthur talked a lot about how courageous Jumple was, or the other survivors, in coming forward, and what that was like. And it made me understand what a significant and pivotal and brave thing that he had done, and that regardless of what happened, it was an amazing thing that he had done, and that I needed to appreciate that.
And I acknowledge that as well, because anybody who either shows up at the Gatehouse or any other facility and asks for help, they're being so courageous. There are so many blocks to get to that point.
Yeah.
Give some tips, couple tips. I want you to go back and forth
Okay.
based on something that you learned through this healing journey in terms of support, or somebody watching this who's in a couple, either they've been violated or they're on the other side of that. Just things that came up for you along the journey.
Okay, I think what comes up a lot in my men's group and in the group that I went through as well, how much detail as a survivor you have to disclose to your partner in terms about what happened during the abuse. And that is something that just occupied my mind a lot, and most of the men that I'm dealing with And as a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, one thing that's very difficult to explain to people who haven't gone through any type of significant trauma is that there's no way in our consciousness to separate what happened in the past from the way we feel right now. So when I disclose exactly the details of what the abuse looked like and things that happened during the course of the abuse, physically I start to hyperventilate, I start to sweat. It feels like I am that little kid in that moment again, and it's very hard. So it from an outsider's perspective, people think that, well, just tell me what happened, that was a long time ago, here you are now, you're safe and everything's okay, but it's a hard thing. And as a survivor, we all disclose little bits. Some of us disclose it all, some of it disclose none of the events of it. And I think there's this interest from our partner of wanting to know what happened. And you need to have a dialogue about that with your partner, about how much I'm able to disclose, whether that will ever be full or not. But I think it's the elephant in the room, right? It's the elephant in the room that until you have that discussion, like, this is what happened, I can tell you this much, but I don't know if I can go further than that. You have to be able to have that discussion.
So is the lesson then in that situation to allow the person to share what they can and not to push, tell me more, it's such a long time ago, tell me, that's gotta, to avoid that and just to hold the space?
Just hold the space.
Yeah.
I think as well it's, I remember somebody in my partner's group saying, I just want to know when it's going to go back to normal. And they were waiting for the 15 weeks to be over, for the person to heal, and then everything was going to go back to normal. And it's never going to go back. It's never going to go back to that way, because if the person has been successful in healing, they're not going to go back to the person they were before. And so it's a scary place to be a partner of someone who's going through that kind of dramatic change. I think what we had going for us, we got married very young. I was 20, he was 21, and we have grown during that marriage and have become different people at different times of our lives. So we've gone through a number of transformations. Transformations are scary things, and the scary thing is always one person is going to transform and fly, and you're going to be left. And this is another one, and so reconciling that it's okay to say goodbye to the way it was before. And it's interesting to me, because so much of this was buried or unrecognized. John Paul can't do or see or things that he used to in the past. So movies that we may have watched in the past, we'll be rewatching a movie we've seen before, but now a certain scene will send him fleeing from the room. It's like, what? You've seen this movie before, but now that those feelings and those experiences are not buried, they're having a different impact. And so, even little things like the type of movies you go and see, the type of books you read, the television that you want to watch, the people you want to surround yourself with, everything has changed. And so,
That's a good point.
But would that be frightening for people to reveal then? Because now that it's the Pandora's box is open, people are expecting healing, that you're going to move forward and everything's going to be fine. You're saying it's not going to be fine, it's going to be different, and now there could be other things that you need to spend some time healing those individual things as well.
But
it will be fine, but it will be bumpy and rocky and difficult.
Oh, and it's important to note that when we eventually get to the point of our lives where we want to disclose, it's not fun. We wanted to go back to the way it used to be, that normal wasn't a nice place to be in. As a survivor, you know that. It's not, so this expectation that I just want the 15 weeks to go by and then everything's going to go, I'm just going to sail on in my life, you know what? to get to that point of your life where you make this disclosure, your life wasn't good, you know, and part of the coping mechanism is to bury the feelings that make you believe it's okay, but it really is not okay. And I said to MaryAnnes, when I eventually started to deal with this, it was as though I had lived in that same house for my entire life, and then I turned the corner upstairs in the hallway, and I opened a door. I was like, where did this room come from? I didn't know we had this extra bedroom in this house that we've been living in, and it's completely empty. And you're struck with two contradictory feelings, that you're excited, oh my, what am I going to do in this room? Am I going to make it into a studio? What are we going to do? Rent it out? What are we going to do with this room? And at the same time is this fear of, what the hell am I going to do with this space? And that's what the disclosure process was for me. It was an opening up of this whole part of me that I didn't allow myself to get access to. But now I'm peeling it away, and it's there, and I'm excited. I have no idea where I want to go with this, but at the same time, I'm like, I don't know where I'm going to go with this. And I think I see that a lot in the men that I'm, you know, working through the program with. The same thing. It's like your life changes, and that's an incredible thing, but it's also a terrifying thing.
But I think, I mean, we know a number of alcoholics that are no longer drinking but are still embedded in alcoholism. And I think that's the difference. You can disclose, you can say I'm an alcoholic or I'm a survivor of childhood sexual abuse, but never heal. And you continue to live, you don't transform. You continue those patterns of behaviors and being that, you know, sad person, or you can take it as an opportunity to transform. But in that, you have to change.
Yeah. And as a survivor, one of the hardest things for me to admit is, with your disclosure, there's a freedom, obviously, but at the same time, tethered to that freedom is a responsibility. And the responsibility is to no longer actively allow what happened to you as a child be an excuse for behaviors for you as an adult. And I'm being totally honest here, is that I have not got to that point yet. It's a journey. But you have to be accountable for your behaviors in a relationship now, and just, you know, blaming everything on the fact that you're a survivor of childhood sexual abuse is not cool anymore. It's not. It's not.
I agree.
And I think quite a few of us kind of default to that position.
It becomes a crutch.
Yeah.
I agree. I hear that a lot. And as much as there's a huge impact and effect on your life when you've been violated, we really have to take responsibility at some point for the decisions that we make and moving forward. And we do alter the course of our life after that event, and we do have control. And even if we've lost our voice, we still have the ability to move our life in different directions through that silence. And it's not easy. I say that in a lot of these videos. It's never easy, but it is a possibility.
It is.
And to ask for help before you jump, you know, train. Any last things that you would like to share with other couples?
Hang on tight. You're together for a reason, and this person is worth it, and the transformation is beautiful.
I would probably say, if you are in a relationship and it's a bumpy relationship or a stable relationship, it's an anchor, and it's always good to have an anchor in your life. And what are we disclosing for? What's the whole purpose of it? The whole purpose of it is to have a richer, fuller, more authentic life. And if you can bring someone else along for that ride, to me, I think that's the whole purpose of what I'm doing here, right? And I'm blessed to have MaryAnnes in my life, and I don't think I would be where I am at now in this process without having MaryAnnes to not only support me, but keep me accountable, and just to be a sounding board, right? Because it's a scary place at times when we're trying to figure out what to do with this part of us that we've suddenly found. So I'm lucky.
Right. Well, thank you so much for your insights.
No,
And,
thank
the energy between you is really nice. Here's to another 27 years.
Well, we hope so.
Cheers
Wow,
to that.
Yeah. Thanks so much.
Thanks.
You've been listening to Reveal, Connect, and Heal. Thank you so much.
There are hopes and treasures beyond your broken wing. There are hopes and treasures beyond your broken wing. Ooh, beyond your